Hey everyone, all of these upcoming stories are pulled from the X board Paranormal on 4chan. Most of the stories were in a green text format, which is not ideal for storytelling. I've added my own swing in to help the stories flow more freely. So bear with me and enjoy these terrifying accounts of paranormal experiences. I lived in a haunted house during my undergraduate studies. I had reoccurring nightmares about the interior of the house being engulfed in flames. I would wake up to feel a temperature change for the hotter, and the interior humidity was worse than the atmosphere outside. Sometimes my housemates and I would hear a loud knock at the separate doors to each of our bedrooms, and an angry man yelling about how he lives in the house. I once opened my door to find a humanoid figure with his skin burned black. He yelled, "This is my house and you should leave." He kept repeating himself and banged on the door after I closed it. I heard strange footsteps descending the stairs, and then nothing, not even a door sound or footsteps upon the living room floor. The footsteps down the stairs had a determinate pace to them, as though the walker was not being accelerated by gravity. There was also a crying girl apparition in the room adjacent to the laundry. She would weep whenever the basement was going to flood. I moved out after one semester because of the disturbances. Later, I found out that there was a fire which had killed the previous residents. The house had been sold on the police auction, and the new owner had rented it out afterwards to myself and my housemates. I think it was demolished about 1 year after I moved out. Ironically, I did better in school when I lived with a ghost. I grew up in a haunted house myself. I was terrified at first, but eventually, I started to notice the differences in how their presence felt. There was only one spirit in the house that truly seemed hostile, and I think that one was a hungry ghost. Ever since then, I've not encountered another like it. All the other spirits I've encountered just aren't scary to me anymore. I've also found that every place I spend a lot of time at is haunted, or starts having activity because of my presence. My boyfriend, for instance, said he experienced nothing paranormal until I moved in. Soon after I moved in, we started hearing knocking from the spare room, where a lot of my stuff was stored. And we've had a ghost cat. My cats react to it even when we can't see it, as though there's another cat. We've heard it. My boyfriend and his father have both seen it, and I felt it run by and brush against my leg along the way. Every time, both my living cats were already accounted for in another room. It is just the most mundane haunting you can imagine. I've encountered far spookier stuff elsewhere, which I'll post about later, but Ghost Cat has been the most recent highly active haunt where I currently live. It really just seems like something is following me wherever I go. Yeah, there was this one small house. No idea what happened in it before, but it's spooky as hell. I drove past it and it's demolished now, but there is a new house built over it. I'm not sure if doing that gets rid of spirits or not, but I wouldn't set foot in there again. The first night I was in there, I opened the door to the bedroom, and I instantly didn't feel good. I felt a sense of danger behind the door that I opened, and I didn't want to be trapped with this thing, so I kind of pushed the door with my foot all the way, and a shadow figure just whooshes past me. I thought maybe I was just seeing things. That bedroom, you could also constantly hear footsteps coming from it whenever you're not inside. There was also a constant smell of sulfur in the room. and I was constantly waking up at the exact same hour of night, and I always feel like something is watching me whenever I do wake up. There was also just random crazy things that would always happen. Shoes would randomly fall from the closet in the middle of the house, and oil from the kitchen cupboard would show up in a room for no reason. Just crazy shit all around. I moved out of there and never experienced anything like that again. The second house I lived in, there was definitely something up with it. Thankfully, it seemed pretty minor, and as odd as it sounds, I actually think whatever was there didn't mind sharing the space with me. I'm your typical hippie. I've taken an oath of pacifism. I do a lot of meditation and play Tai Chi, eat vegan, practice yoga, etc. I'm not saying that to brag, but it definitely has made me more aware of my surroundings. The first couple of months of living at this place, I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, aside from getting a vibe that I was being watched whenever I went into my kitchen or living room. But later on, I would start to hear footsteps at the other end of my house, and there were times where things would shift around at night. The best example I have is after an abnormally long day at work. I was laying down on my couch and dozing off. The only light I had was a candle I was burning on my coffee table, when I suddenly heard what sounded like an abnormally large set of dominoes being knocked over. When my eyes jumped to where I heard the noise come from, I saw that every book on my bookshelf had been skewed to one side, like something had knocked them over. Not long after that, I would notice that my tea boxes were always opened whenever I went to make myself a pot of it. Sometimes my fridge would be slightly ajar, and minor things like carrots and the leftovers in my fridge would go missing. I brought this up to my friend at one point, and he made a joke along the lines of, "Well shit, you probably just have a hungry ghost or something." That did make an odd amount of sense to me for some reason. So I decided to start making meals for two for a week and leaving the other half on the counter while I went to eat in my room. Sure enough, after a few days of doing that, the other portions would just occasionally go missing without a trace. So I decided not to question it, and once a week, I would make a meal for two and repeat. This story is from the point of view of my brother, who lived with us for the first 5 years of my life. This was probably around 2004 and 2005. My brother was in bed asleep, and his feet was hanging out from under the blanket because we were poor and couldn't afford to buy more, bigger blankets. Something had scratched his foot, enough to leave red lines where it was, and skin to be disturbed, like the very top layer of skin is ripped. Once this happens, he looks to the foot of his bed and sees an old woman. He thinks it must be Grandma, who also lives with us. But Grandma isn't that tall, and Grandma also doesn't have that long of hair. And Grandma is in a wheelchair. She can't get up the stairs, let alone stand at the end of the bed. He immediately freaks out and starts crying. There's tears everywhere. He's too scared to get out of bed and turn on the light. The bed is also really creaky, so any movements he makes is heard throughout the house. And he starts crawling in the bed to get as far away from the woman as possible, thus creating a lot of noise. The scare took the breath out of him, so he couldn't call out for help. And then my mother rushes in and turns on the light, and the figure instantly disappears. Then my father rushes in a few seconds later, and he was grabbing the gun. They see my brother in tears, and don't question what he saw. They also saw his foot. There was nothing that could have scratched him. I don't have a haunted house story, but I've got a haunted workplace one. Around 15 years ago, before I started working there, one of the employees committed suicide up in this sort of storage area above the dairy cooler. Apparently, he'd been a junkie and was seriously depressed and went up and hung himself. One of the managers went up and found him and refuses to talk about it, but the rest of the managers who were working at the time verified the story. So apparently the guy, whose name was Johnny, haunted the back room, specifically the dairy department. So back to present time, I was probably around 17, and I was working at this small grocery store in the dairy section. I was on the closing shift, which is until 8 p.m., and the only one in the department on this side of the store. The back room is creepy enough when no one's around, and so is being in the dairy cooler alone. Anyways, I was hanging out there doing some cleaning. It was a really slow night, and the produce manager and the manager for the meat department come in. Apparently there was some sort of management meeting. They ask if I'm busy. I say no. Let's go try and talk to Johnny, they said. I agreed. Sounds cool, let's do it. We climbed the ladder up to the storage room above the dairy cooler. The produce manager, Craig, pulls out his cell phone. He's got one of those Spirit Box apps on it that have random words pop up on the screen that is supposed to be a ghost talking to you or some shit. I was skeptical and believed that something like that could never be accurate. He starts trying to use it anyway, and dumb shit pops up. Ghost, spirit, help, etc. The words changed every 5 seconds, but it was a different word every time. Suddenly, the word sunflower pops up, and the word sunflower keeps appearing on the screen after that. Craig and I laugh because what the fuck does that even mean? Patty, who was also beside us, starts freaking out. She tells us that she used to wear a perfume that had a picture of a sunflower on the bottle, and that Johnny really liked it, and even started calling her Sunflower. We basically shit our pants and then get out of there. This wasn't in my house, but I traveled to Thailand with my wife and her sister, and was told by the translator that before entering your hotel room for the first time, you have to knock and inform the spirits inhabiting the room that you were entering, so that they would leave. I assume it's just a thing to tell tourists, but I do it anyways at the first 3 hotels. At the end of the trip, I arrive at the last hotel, and I'm tired from spending hours on a tour bus, so I forget to knock before entering the hotel. My wife and her sister are out still, so I'm there alone. The night goes pretty normally. I don't think about ghosts even once. I just sit there watching the one English channel they had on TV. I fell asleep watching TV. My wife and her sister come back to the hotel while I'm asleep. The next morning, my wife approached me, and she asked if I forgot to knock before entering the room. I tell her, yeah, why? She tells me that when they got home, they saw shadowy figures watching me as I slept, and my wife's sister saw a floating head watching her in the reflection of the bathroom mirror. I think they were just bullshitting me, but then I realize they couldn't have been because they didn't even know I didn't knock until they asked me the next morning. I have had a number of paranormal experiences at a cabin my dad lives in, but none were quite as bizarre as one that happened to me while in college. This was last spring. I was living in a small dorm on a lake as a part of a field station semester. It was very isolated compared to being on campus, and it could creep you out at night. I would hear stories of a young boy named Jimmy who passed away at an adjacent farm, also owned by the college. That place is spooky as shit. It's a very old farmhouse. It was said he would manifest himself in an inexplicable light moving around the lake. Multiple residents who had spent prior semesters there told stories of strange lights on very remote, hard-to-access parts of the lake shore. Sometimes these lights would move off of the shore and hover out over the water. I never thought much of this until one night I was trying to fall asleep. My roommate was already out cold. It's dark as hell everywhere, the room included, save a small light by my roommate's bed. I look over and I see a young man walking around by the dim light. Holy fuck, Carl. I didn't hear you get up. The beds were noisy as hell. I looked over and Carl is still dead asleep in bed. Oh fuck, that's not fucking Carl. I sit there in a cold sweat, watching as this figure walks about in that side of the room. Suddenly, a loud banging noise from above scares the fuck out of me. Just about have a heart attack. Oh shit, it's just people getting back from the bar, making noise upstairs. I looked back to where the figure was, and it was gone. In its place was an orb of light that was floating around. It was in the room at first. Then it goes through the closed window, out into the woods. It disappears after a few seconds. I shit my pants and try desperately to fall asleep. The next day, I asked the bar goers if any of them were fucking around outside my room. All of them deny it. Some of them, others who had seen Jimmy, are a little freaked out. Me and my family moved about 9 months ago. The first 2 months, nothing really happened. Summer comes and everything is dry. No rain for like 3 weeks. Then random stains started appearing on the ceiling of our house. We called a plumber, but he didn't find any pipes up there. They are still appearing to this day. We also have gravel on the driveway. And every Tuesday I hear walking sounds between 1 and 3 a.m., sometimes scratching on the iron blinds. I decide to go out and check. I turn the lights on and go out, and nothing. I set up a camera and the sounds of the footsteps stay, but there's nothing on the tapes. In the past 2 weeks we could hear banging on the walls and steps from the loft. What is weird is that the house was built 3 years ago. And nobody lived here for 1.5 years. Sometimes I still shit myself when hearing the scratching on the blinds. I lived in a haunted house while I was 7 to 10 years old. We had just moved to a new town, some 70 miles from where we had been living previously. My older sister, not wanting to change schools, moved in with my grandparents, but spent most weekends with us. Despite barely being around, being the older sibling, she got to choose her room, and she of course chose the bigger of the 2 available rooms. One with a nice walk-in closet. A nice walk-in closet that we had to clean candle wax and chicken feathers out of. Yeah, we were told after buying the place that the girl who had been living in that room previously had been dabbling in Satanism and the occult. We also learned after buying it that it had been a local gathering place for years, and stuff like pictures coming off the wall and flying halfway across the room was a normal occurrence. All sorts of stuff happened the few years we lived there. Footsteps up and down the stairs all night, weird images and photographs. Cupboard doors that were weighted shut, opening themselves, only to close again. Electronics were all fucked up. They would turn themselves on and off randomly, and you could sometimes hear voices coming from speakers that were turned off. My sister had a CD player that could switch between 3 CDs, but the switcher never worked, except in her bedroom, which was one of the most haunted rooms in the house, where it would switch for no apparent reason The weirdness eventually got so bad, my sister started bunking with me for her visits. All that said, no one was ever hurt, and it never felt like something was trying to oppress us. Just weird, unexplainable shit happened on a regular basis.